Great. Thank you very much indeed. So I'm Sarah Prosser and I lead the bioregioning Southeast Ireland. And I'm delighted to welcome everybody here today. It's really nice to see people curious about new things appearing in the bioregion. I'm accompanied by Keely O'Brien, who's my colleague here, and Sheila Cook from 3LM. And we're going to organise it that we're going to start by just doing a little bit of presentation and background from the bioregioning Southeast Ireland about how we work and why we work the way we do, and why we see the match between the work that we do and 3LM. So you can see our two website front pages are on the right of the title slide. And we work on a sort of collective action for big scale systemic change. And you can see there that 3LM have words like, courses for Earth regeneration. And I think there's so much complementarity that I hope you'll understand by the end of this webinar. But the main point of tonight is to understand a bit more about what holistic management is, which is the core part of 3LM. The title of this, though, is What if we could turn things around, and a practical path to regeneration. So let's see if we can discover what that practical path is by 8 o'clock. Okay, so next slide, please. The first question we also have to ask is why we're doing this. And I think this is a thing that's very common for our two organisations, is that Ireland's environment is not where it should be. These are the words of Laura Burke from the EPA. And she really emphasises this thing that the outlook isn't optimistic unless we can really start understanding that it's all sectors of society that need to address it. And that the environmental challenges are complex and systemic, and that they cut across all the different environmental topics, such as climate and air and soil and water and biodiversity and waste, and all different organisations and businesses and all levels of society. It's complicated and it's complex. And that we're going to be unable to stem the tide of nature's destruction, and we may not be able to fully understand the impact of all this complexity until it's too late. So the final paragraph there says that, there are lots of different national plans and programs going on. They're all happening on individual challenges and of soil and water and things, but there is still a big coherence challenge, because there isn't this sort of ability to deal with that complexity and have a single framework. And you can see that while that is really it's a call for action, I think what it doesn't really include is what we can see in the maps on the right-hand side there. The top one is high nature value farmland, probability of finding it. And the bottom one is the nitrates map that came out recently from the EPA. And the big thing on these maps is the variation across Ireland. And what is the difference between the northwest and the southeast? We've got slightly different challenges, and we need to be able to take that regional variation into account. Next slide, please. So our organisation uses what we call bioregioning, or a landscape approach. And I'm just going to read this definition of a bioregion because it invites us to inhabit a place in a way that's full of relationship. And seeing where the natural boundaries of our bioregion are, we can then see that the many ecosystems and the human systems are live within it. And all of these systems, such as the freshwater, the biodiversity, transport and health, they're all connected. And there's a connecting story that starts in geology and shows up through the soil. And that what we're trying to do is angle those systems towards regeneration. So here's our bioregion in the Southeast Ireland. Next slide, please. So first thing we're going to try and do is see where the natural boundaries described there are. And this is two maps of Ireland. One on the left is the 32 counties. The one on the right are the natural boundaries. These are what the river catchments show us. And you can see that it's a slightly different division and maybe gives us a different container to have different stories within and to deal with complexity in a way that respects nature and the integrity of the ecosystems and the communities within them. So next slide, please. What we do with bioregions is link them into clusters around sort of scale that we can address things at a large scale. And this is the cluster that we have down in the southeast. So when we're talking about the southeast bioregion, we're talking about the Blackwater, the Three Sisters, and the coastal rivers there. Next slide, please. Now, within that new container, what do we do? And this is where we use the Common Land framework. Common Land is a Dutch NGO that's been working in different landscapes globally. And this is their way of, if you look at the left-hand column there, it says that, if you're looking at these big areas where there's degradation, there's 4 kinds of losses. And on the right-hand side, there's 4 kinds of returns that we need to do to bring about these ecosystem restoration projects. And while starting from the bottom, we need to bring back finance. Then we also need to make sure there's a return of natural capital. We need to make sure there's social return. And then importantly, at the top there is that one called the return of inspiration. If we don't somehow motivate people by bringing them into a sort of sense of place and motivating and through larger networks, what is that connection to land, and what is the different things that might bring that inspiration to keep the other 3 going? So this is what we call the 4 returns framework. And the next slide shows that impact, that second column there, those are the 4 returns. And what we do is we work with them in a process where we make landscape plans and partnerships. We recognize different zones and work for 20 years to try and bring back that big scale restoration. Next slide, please. This is how we work. We go out and we try to build trust and relationships with local people. We bring them in and we look at how can we change systems. And then from that, we listen to what kind of ideas might be able to bring back those 4 returns. And we put those into thematic topics and what we call concepts of things that we could be actively doing in the bioregion to make those 4 returns come to the Southeast bioregion in this case. The next slide. This is the diagram we use sometimes. So we've got this portfolio of our 4 return concepts, and they're all entangled because they're complicated and they're complex. And then below, we've got a support platform. That's the Bioregional Southeast Ireland hub. So that's us. And then we also do things like looking at how can we bring in new flows of finance? How can we map things? And then there's that word learning. What kind of learning offerings can we bring in that will create the enabling conditions for all these different things to happen? And that's an example of what we're doing today, introducing a new learning opportunity into the bioregion that might help bring about those 4 returns. So next slide, please. In that portfolio, there's lots of things going on in there. And this is one example of 4R farming. This is called Our Farm at Bushy Park. It's a new farm that we're co-starting. And it brings back social return, inspirational return, nature, and financial returns all at once. And the next slide shows something else in the portfolio. And this is another tool that's coming out from the Bride project that was looking just at biodiversity. And then Donal, who was leading that team, said, but it needs to bring back all 4 returns. And how would we measure all the 4 returns if we were going to bring back, really say what sustainability was? There's loads more, but I'm not going to go into them tonight. So just the next slide. This is a sort of way of showing that if we put all the projects happening down on the left, then it's all complex. Do we go back? Go through that complexity because they're all entangled and they all relate to each other, but together they're going to deliver on the 4 returns. So if we're suggesting this is a sort of big portfolio that can be invested in, that's the kind of thing we'll do. That's our website, and if you go there, you'll be able to read much more about it up at the top there. But with that, I'm going to pass over to Keely, and she's going to just make the segue into 3LM, and then you'll be able to hear more about what they're up to. But thank you very much. Keely?
Thanks. Sorry, yes, having a little issue there. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Sarah. I'm Keely O'Brien, and as Sarah said, I'm working with her at Bioregening in Southeast Ireland, and my role is as regenerative business developer, which means I have the real privilege to go out and work with people who are making changes all across our bioregion, many of whom are farmers or land managers, or in other ways working within our ecosystems and our farmlands. And this is a really exciting evening for me because I've been kind of following along with the work of 3LM for quite a few years. I think I first heard about them at the Knott's conference in Port which was in 2019, and kind of have followed what's been going on with them and the different trainings they've offered here in Ireland and in the UK since then. So this feels like a really nice, from a personal perspective, a really cool kind of bringing together of different worlds, and a really interesting approach. I think something we think about a lot in our work is the question of what is holistic, and what does that term mean, and what does holistic management mean? So it's really exciting for me to introduce Sheila Cook of 3LM to carry on with her presentation. So I'll give it over to you, Sheila. Thanks.
Thank you, Keely, and thank you, Sarah, for that beautiful introduction. And we at 3LM are so delighted to be working with bioregioning Southeast Ireland on this webinar. And thank you to all of you for attending. So the question is, what if we could turn things around? We're going to outline a practical path for regeneration. What does that really look like? So here's the proposed pathway. And as Sarah has been talking about, it has to start with hope and inspiration. Then learning happens, reframing, and this can all go in any order, and it's kind of circular. Reframing, and then it's about creating life conditions for regeneration. So that's what we're going to talk about. Let's begin with hope. The kind of bright, eager hope in this baby. Shifting from despair to hope gives us the energy to act in a meaningful way. One of the best ways to spark that shift is to draw inspiration from real, living examples of regeneration. And we're going to give you quite a few of those tonight. But first of all, why does hope really matter? It actually matters from a psychological point of view. And when we look at this map of consciousness by David R. Hawkins, when we're acting down here in shame, guilt, apathy, or grief, when we have these emotions really anchoring our being, we're in despondency, and it's very hard to have positive action. But as we move up, we're able to take positive action more and more. And that's why it's so important how we feel. And we need to support each other and support ourselves to shift out of these places where it's very hard to take action to all these places where it becomes much easier to take action. Let's look at a few examples of regeneration to fuel our own sense of hope. Nature can recover quickly when the right life conditions are created. Let's start with an example from Australia. Charles Massey wrote the book Call of the Reed Warbler, and in it he shows how regenerative agriculture can heal. Massey's own degraded Australian farm became fertile again, so restored that a reed warbler absent for decades and very far away mysteriously returned. The book argues that such ecological renewal is possible everywhere if we transform how we grow food and how we care for soil. Let's look at a really human example of regeneration, and someone that may be well known to you in Ireland, Marianne Keyes. She's an Irish author, and she has spoken quite openly about her own battle with alcoholism and depression, which led to even a suicide attempt before she entered rehabilitation in 1995. After treatment, she wrote her first novel, Watermelon, and went on to publish many bestsellers, becoming one of Ireland's most beloved writers. Her story shows not just survival, but the rebuilding of a creative and stable life. Let's look at an example from holistic management. Alan Savory's very own Dimbangombe. He purchased this land in the 1970s In Zimbabwe, and Alan Savory applied holistic planned grazing using livestock to mimic the movements of wild herds on land that was barren for decades and deemed unfit for any purpose. This approach restored the soil, revived the grasses, and brought back the water cycle, and transformed a failing landscape into a thriving one. And his work showed that carefully managed animals can regenerate ecosystems once thought beyond recovery. This example from Yellowstone, you may be familiar with. The aspen had failed to return for decades until scientists realized the missing wolves were the cause. Eradicated in the 1920s under US government policy, the absence of the wolves let elk overbrowse young trees. When wolves were reintroduced, elk behavior changed. Vegetation and biodiversity rebounded, riverbanks stabilized, and a powerful trophic cascade restored the land. Isabella Tree wrote a book called Wilding, and she tells how she and her husband Charlie turned their debt-ridden, exhausted West Sussex farm into a thriving, rewilded estate. As they stepped back and let nature lead, rare birds and wildlife returned in abundance. Today, Knepp is so alive with biodiversity that its wildlife safaris sell out each season. After rekindling hope that nature can indeed recover when we do the right things, we turn to learning. We must understand, what tools do we have to work with? How will ecosystems respond? And how to tell when regeneration is on track? These questions become far easier to navigate when we use a clear framework to guide us through the complexity. And here's a picture of the holistic management framework. It lets us enter from any point and find guidance for the challenge at hand. It's rooted in ecological literacy, where we learn about ecosystem process function, and it helps us make wise economic, social, and ecological choices, and even learn from mistakes through a continual feedback loop, knowing that we're not perfect and we're dealing with complexity. It's okay to make mistakes, but we find the early warning signs so that we can take corrective action quickly. Alan Savory's framework reminds us that managing ecosystems, people, and economies is complex and demands humility. As he said, we always end up being precisely wrong. Can't someone be at least approximately right? In the 2016 edition of Holistic Management, he noted that practitioners do get better the more they use the framework, because it's a learning journey, and that's why people improve their decision making. In holistic management, we begin with ecological literacy, seeing nature as a great big process. We learn the 4 ecosystem processes: the water cycle, the mineral cycle, energy flow, and community dynamics. Through this lens, regeneration becomes clear. It means improving the function of these 4 ecosystem processes across the landscape. And those are all measurable with observable metrics. Here are 4 examples of people using the holistic management framework to regenerate land. Irish farmer Clive Bright told me that before he took our training, he really doubted that holistic management would actually make a difference. He was already doing rotational grazing, and he just didn't think anything would be better than what he was doing. However, he surprised himself. And after just 1 season with holistic planned grazing, he saw dramatic change. enough that over winter he could graze and fatten cattle outdoors on land that once collapsed under the weight of heavy animals. Let's look at an example from Scotland. Roger Dixon's Spain of the Salin project in Lismore proved it's possible to regenerate in a place that receives nearly 2 meters of annual rainfall. After a few years of holistic management, I was training on the farm, and the very, very last day, we had a great big rainstorm, and it just came down in buckets. So I thought, oh, good, this is my chance to walk around and see how is this working. So I walked across the neighboring sheep croft first, which was set stock grazed. And as you can see, there were torrents coming along the farm track, and there were puddles that were becoming ponds everywhere. So I jumped across the fence to Roger and Jilly's croft, which had been holistically managed for, well, probably about 5 years at that time. And it was a dramatic difference. And Roger told me in this ditch alongside his farm track, it used to look exactly like what I show here in the neighboring croft. And you can see it's dry. And this is after the picture on the left. So there should be even more flooding, but it's not. Why? Because that land is soaking up every drop of rain. Why? Because they repaired a broken water cycle. On the left, we have a broken water cycle. On the right, we have a healthy, effective water cycle, meaning that land can soak up every drop of rain. The results were remarkable. In just 4 years, they saw a 268% increase in grass growth and 52% more growing days, achieved not through the use of artificial inputs, but by using a clear decision-making and planning framework that enabled them to align their management with how nature actually functions. I've got another example. This time from Buckinghamshire, where Radka Gromnikova took over a horse paddock that had been managed very conventionally for about 20 years. And you may know what those look like. It looks just like the one on the left. And within 18 months, she had it beautiful, looking just like it does on the right. These are her amazing photographs. And so 18 months after managing holistically without artificial inputs or reseeding, the land got transformed into tall, dense, biodiverse sward, providing far healthier forage for her horses. And one last example to really fill us with hope that this is possible, this time from upstate New York, Paul and Phyllis Van Amberg. As new entrant farmers, Paul and Phyllis purchased a struggling dairy farm. The cows were in very poor condition, 73% mastitis, and endless stress as Paul cut hay to cover the long periods where they couldn't have animals out on their paddocks. The farm was exhausted, and so were they. Phyllis went and attended a talk on holistic management, and she knew that was what she needed. And from that moment on, everything changed. Within 3 years, grazing days rose 120%. Their gross margin jumped from 3% to 41%. And the business became so resilient, they bought the neighboring farm. Truly, less stress, more grass. And that 73% mastitis dropped to less than 3%. They hardly saw the vet anymore. How did they do it? Their success came from following holistic planned grazing. These are their grazing charts for 3 years, which they could use for planning and then for tracking the actual results. And they use it to enable them to adjust to the conditions that are actually happening on the land. The charts also provide an accurate record of what truly happened, helping them refine their management each year and steadily improve grazing outcomes. Okay, let's come back to our practical pathway. We've covered hope and we've covered learning. Reframing comes up next, and that might seem like a really unusual term to use in regeneration. However, it's essential. It asks us to challenge our beliefs. We ask, is this really true? And if not, we learn how to reframe it so that we're in a more resourceful state for taking action. Let's look at 3 reframing examples to show how powerfully this shift can support regeneration. My first example didn't go so well. This was our very first groundswell in 2017, and I had 3 young Irish farmers visit, and they went through our stand and they took our quiz and everything, and they insisted that everything we shared in our stand was wrong because it completely contradicted what they had just spent a lot of money learning in a 4-year agricultural college. They simply couldn't imagine that conventional wisdom might be flawed. And it often takes several such moments before someone can reframe their knowledge and open up to new learning. But that's what has to happen for many, many people. I want to show a really positive example of reframing, one that happened right in the class. This is Claire Whittle. You might have heard of her. But when she took our class, she was quite in despair, I would have to say. She's a British veterinary surgeon. What she was in despair about was that her work was in conventional dairy practice, and she was often asked to do things that she didn't believe in and she knew could be prevented. In my class, she wrote a holistic context that helped her to imagine a new pathway for herself, a different pathway. Today, she now calls herself a regenerative vet, and she passionately teaches farmers about dung beetles and their vital role in a healthy, functioning ecosystem. Here's another very positive example of reframing that took place a few years after the training, which is very common because we continuously learn after we start down this journey. This is Jonathan Chapman. He farms near London. In class, he was quite adamant that glyphosate was essential and safe, and nothing could sway him. However, 3 years later, I took a class on his farm and had him give a tour and talk about how holistic management was helping him. And he proudly said to my class, "This is my last year using glyphosate. I've seen the harm it does to the ecosystem, and I'm done with it." Well, here's another example of reframing, this time from a business, HD Wool, a Yorkshire company with well more than 150 years in wool trading. They faced thin margins and a limited purpose. And this is Joe Dawson, the descendant of the founder of Dawson's, which he renamed as HD Wool. And using holistic management, we helped them to reframe their purpose from commodity trading to wool innovation, a shift that transformed them from passive brokers into catalysts for regeneration, connecting fiber, farmers, and ecosystems in a new purpose-led business model. Okay, we're on the last one now in this practical pathway to regeneration. It's all about life conditions. Well, what do we mean by that? Across all the many examples I've given you, regeneration happens when people create the right life conditions for nature and for themselves. Life conditions include anything that shapes growth, from weather to chemicals to grazing animals, or for people, our circumstances and our relationships, what happens to us on a daily basis. These are life conditions. We cannot directly change land, plants, livestock, or other people, We can only improve the life conditions that we're responsible for creating and trust that they will be able to reorganize and regenerate with healthier life conditions. This person, he's a master of creating healthy life conditions. You may know him. This is Gabe Brown. He's author of From Dirt to Soil, and he's one of the best known holistic management practitioners on planet Earth. He describes his creation of life conditions in this way. In the morning when I woke up, I used to ask, what am I going to kill today? Now I ask, how am I going to feed my soil today? When the soil is right, everything else follows. His mindset perfectly captures the essence of creating healthy life conditions for regeneration. So, how do we go about creating life conditions for change? Well, it's a lot like this. It's a lot like being on an airplane. We must put on our own mask first. Regeneration starts with our own learning. And then, even being just a half a step ahead can make a real difference. Here's one real recent example from Ireland. One recent participant in one of our classes, he told me that he wanted his colleagues to adopt holistic management, but he met with great resistance. They told him, you're all wrong, we can't do that, it's never going to work. So he quietly kept his learning going, and when he found the right moment, he used the 7 context checks. Those are the questions you see on this page that enable us to make sure we're getting economic, social, and ecological outcomes with a certain decision. So he used this when difficult decisions arose, and the process drew other people in. It built alignment, and it led to everyone having the same conclusion. This is a powerful example of quiet leadership creating the life conditions for change amongst his colleagues in a step-by-step approach. Alan Savory, he says, well, why does holistic management work? According to him, this is why it works. The greatest strength of this new management framework is that it leads us to see that we serve our own interests best when we account for the environmental as well as the social and economic consequences of our actions. So we can get our own needs met best when we're looking at the economic, the social, and the ecological, as in the 4 returns that you heard Sarah talk about at the beginning. So holistic management works because it helps us move from despair to hope so that we have energy to take action through real examples of success. Then we learn ecological literacy, and we reframe our thinking. We see the world holistically, and most importantly, it gives us everything we need to know so that we can create healthy life conditions that allow genuine change and regeneration to happen. So, what gives you hope? Find out what that is. Nurture it. In hope are the seeds for positive action. The positive results we get become the seeds of hope for the next person. Be the seed of hope and pass it on. And I'm going to pause there, and we've got plenty of time for questions. That might have just tickled your fancy, and Keely is going to lead the Q&A session for us.
That's great. Thank you very much, Sheila, for that presentation. Super interesting. And my curiosity is piqued. Hopefully everyone else's too. I don't see any questions yet in the chat. So if anyone does have one, please raise your hand and I'm happy to, or feel free to come off mute and ask. And maybe while we're waiting, I have a question for you, Sheila. One of the questions, I mean, I know we're going to speak a little bit about the upcoming holistic management fundamentals training in February, which we're offering here at Dunhill. So before we kind of get into the details of what that will contain, I think something that really struck me that you were just speaking about there is that that feeling of inertia, part of why we find the four returns so important, that question of inspiration. And it seems like it really does align so well with the work that you're doing. And I'm just wondering where you see the inspiration piece fitting right into those four. Maybe it's a bit of each of the four of those, the path to regeneration that you talked about. I don't know if there's a more clear link there. Is it just an obvious kind of alignment that's happened really naturally?
Yeah, I think that inspiration is that hope. It's that first step in that pathway, because I find for people to even embark upon any kind of training, they must have some hope. Because to take training, that's quite an important action. And so the hope needs to come first. And one of the best ways to get that is to go visit a farm that's already going down the track. That's a great way to really feel inspired and know that it's possible, because you're meeting a real person who's really already a step ahead and doing the act of regeneration and benefiting from it. And that there's nothing more inspiring than meeting a farmer who's doing that.
That's great. Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in with any questions?
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I want to introduce Sam. Sam Fuller is heading up our business, 3LM, in Ireland. And I'd just like to have him introduce himself. And after we hear from Sam, let's hear from Christopher. And just over to you, Sam.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so yeah, my name is Sam Fuller. I'm from a small town called Tallow in West Waterford. I was raised on a mixed farm and I did all the kind of dirty jobs that anyone else would do on a farm for the first 15 years of my life, digging ditches and shoveling shit and fencing in all kinds of weather. And I enjoyed it. But I did take a different direction. I trained as a geologist. So my role, why am I here? My role is I was brought on or started to work with 3LM with to become the start of the Irish presence, let's say, of 3LM. I'm hoping that it can grow over time. And my remit or my intention over the next 40 years is to try and make regenerative agriculture the best practice. And that involves policy change, it involves setting up classes all over the country that are regular and networking with loads of different people so that it's understood that this class will be here in June, this will be here in May or whatever, and that people know that these are available. I want to get classes into various schools, lectures into universities, get it into the Green Cert, and embed it so that it becomes best practice, because I think it's inevitable that that's what's going to happen, and I just want to help move that along. As I mentioned, I studied geology. In 1996, I started it, and I wanted to understand how the world worked, how the world came to be as it is. And as I studied, I became aware of the different processes and how they worked. And it was basically how energy moved materials around the world, either from the center of the earth or sun creating sediments and various processes, landslides, earthquakes, volcanoes, and all these other things. And once I understood the processes, it meant that when I looked out at the landscape, I didn't see it in the same way anymore. Well, I would see the beautiful mountain, but I would see how it came to be the way it was by virtue of understanding the processes that made it happen. And I could understand how that fitted into time. My perspective on time was obviously different. A billion years here, a million years there, or whatever. So when I started training as holistic management, that's a longer story. I well, I think it was day two when it suddenly clicked for me. And I started to understand the four ecosystem processes that Sheila has described and various key insights that are part of the training. And now I don't look at the landscape or any living environment in the same way anymore. When I look at it, and I'm still learning, I'm not an expert, but I can look at it and I can see, okay, that's degrading or that is regenerating because I understand the processes and how they work and how our effects upon them will cause the living environment to move in one direction or the other. And it's something I'm going to learn over the course of my life. But by understanding the processes, you won't see your land in the same way anymore. You'll see it differently. Um, so why am I becoming a holistic management trainer instead of farming myself? I'd like to farm in later years, but at the moment, I think I can reach more people doing this. But there's four key reasons that I want to do it, that I think it's important. One is health. I had my own health issues many years ago that sent me down a kind of a route of trying to understand and figure out what healthy food means. I think most diseases that we're suffering from are due to the food we're eating and the things we're consuming. We're basically nutrient deficient in many, many ways. And our systems of defense, every living organism defends itself against things that want to eat it one way or the other. And if we're not building ourselves from the correct materials, we're not going to be able to do that. And I see regenerative agriculture as the best method of maximizing the symbiosis with the soil such that the minerals can be extracted up into the food chain and into us so that we can build ourselves properly and defend ourselves against things that are want to eat us, basically. The second reason is we must keep people on the land and we must keep people aware of the connection to food because we have to maintain a voting bloc so that we can maintain food security. The third reason is I think it's critical to have the family farm to maintain the family farm because that's the foundation of the middle class. And the middle class is the ladder that poor people use to climb. And if you only have rich and poor, you get revolution. And we don't want that. We want evolution. So we have to have that middle part. And the last reason is independence and hope, as Sheila mentioned. I think it's very important, or it's important to me that farmers become independent of price fluctuations, of the input costs that they have become dependent upon over the last 70 odd years. And these prices are just going up and up and up. And what I like about holistic management is that it allows you through various mechanisms in the framework to understand how you can reduce your inputs and increase your profit per acre while improving the environment and your soil. And also it's hope. There's an awful lot of young men and women out there as well who would like to become farmers, but farmers have been painted as the villain. And I'd like to reframe that as farmers could be they could be the best friend the environmental movement could ever hope for. And they can be the steward, but they need ecological literacy, which is what Sheila mentioned. And it's also a kind of a vision for the future that farmer can sell to his son or his daughter to say, look, I've improved this farm, I've added carbon to it, I've actually invested in your future by putting carbon into the soil. And then the son can say, okay, I can improve that into the future and invest in the next generation, basically putting money into your bank. Whether it's just as you can grow food in bad times or that they've made carbon into a kind of money now, and we don't know what kind of value that'll have in the future. So I see it as a way of increasing hope. Fundamentally, we've gone through 70 odd years of, like Sheila said, where the paradigm is to kill things that are competing against you rather than get into a situation where we're growing things that can help us. And with that, I'll throw it back to the room. I'd also say to anyone who's listening is that, again, we're trying to increase classes across the country. If anybody has any opportunities or any way that we can network, I'm going to put my number in the chat. If anybody is maybe shy to ask questions here now, I'll put my number there. Give me a call, and we're always open to have a conversation and explain more about it. And I'm sure Sheila's going to put up a poster about our course in Dunhill very shortly, and you'll see the details of what that'll be. That's in Dunhill, but there are online courses as well, and we go out to farmers. There's various ways we can be flexible to bring this information to farmers. And I suppose one of the important things as well, and maybe Sheila touched on it, is that we're not going to tell the farmer what they should do, or the grower or anyone else what they should do. It's their farm, and what we're giving them is information and tools whereby that they can make decision and notice whether they're changing things in a positive or negative direction, and much, much more. So that's
Thanks
my
very
pitch.
much, Sam. Just a quick reflection on that. That was really great to hear your background and where you're coming from. And that you're talking about farmers wanting to leave the land in better condition for the future generations. And that really strikes a chord with us, as it really reflects the outcomes of the bioregions food manifesto that was created by about 4 different bioregional representatives a couple of years ago, where that was one of the big, really strong lines from it. There are a lot of great lines, but one of them was that question of wanting to be a good ancestor, and what does that look like, and how are we passing things on to the next generation and inspiring them to want to come to the, yeah, really fast. Thanks.
Yeah, I listened to that video. I recommend maybe someone could put the link into the chat for anyone. It's a YouTube video. Basically, there's a guy called Ray. I forget his second name. Maybe you can put it in there. But he narrated.
Ray McGraw, he's here on the call now. Yeah.
What was he? Apologies, Ray. I know you're. Yeah. Anyway, but he spoke about this. He basically dictated this manifesto with screens in the background, and I would recommend anybody to go and listen to it. It's a very inspiring piece and well read too. But I agree that line about becoming a good ancestor, that's the one that jumped out at me. And the bioregioning, I'm really impressed that you're getting this thing going, because I think one of the part of holistic management is that you think about holes within holes, and a water catchment is a hole, and it's a very, very good way of conceptualizing a hole that we can make change on. And everyone understands that clean water is important, and anything there becomes less of becomes more valuable. It's something to think about going into the future. So,
thank you, Sam. And let's have Christopher introduce yourself.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Sam. It's a tough act to follow with that passion. It's lovely. And thank you, Sarah and Keely, for inviting us here this evening. And thank you to you all for turning up. Back in 2014, Sheila and I chose to take on board holistic management as a framework. And one of the things I'm known for is really troubleshooting in complex arenas, and I won't go into that list, but basically when things fall over, that tends to be where I go. Either natural processes, droughts, I'm well versed in droughts internationally, but also when big organisations fail to deliver the results that society is expecting, or that it leads to dis-ease and a lack of coherence in the organisation. Those tend to be the places that I've operated in all my career. And the word coherence, I really appreciated Sarah's slide at the beginning in this, the coherence challenge, because whether it's soil, plants, animals, humans, or the planet, when we get to a place where coherence cuts in, that means it's inevitable that alignment and nature's full expression can emerge. And it's one of the things I'm very interested in terms of people as well, because this work with you all really is about releasing the latent potential of the human species, of people in the regions that you're interested in and focused on, but realizing that it's not just about farmers, it's about everybody fulfilling their role and contribution. And the way I think about it at the moment when I'm looking at this particular initiative is everyone on this call has got a different piece of the jigsaw puzzle. Our challenge is to bring together a new box for the jigsaw puzzle and put a new picture on the surface that becomes the path for coherence for us all as we learn to grow into a future that's literally going to be beyond our comprehension. It's the scale of change at the moment is vast. So personally, I'm only interested in stuff that works. And I've only yet found one management framework that brings nature and the vitality of all life front and center into the discernment and interpretation of the choices that we make, either individually, as families, as towns, villages, regions, as governments, and this is the scope of where holistic management has been applied. I'm only interested in stuff that works, and as an interpretive framework and a means of discerning pathways that keep us on a path that's approximately right, linking back to what Sheila said about Alan Savory, I've not found anything better. And I'm very open, and as soon as we find anything better. But in terms of our conversation this evening, I'm really delighted that Sarah opened with this request for overarching frameworks. And if we want to augment everything that's going on with your work around common land as a comprehensive, systematic approach to uplift a region, I believe that the work of the contribution that a holistic management framework could make could be substantial. So I'm complete, and I shall pass back to Keely.
Great. Thanks very much, Christopher. I think probably we've got about 10 minutes left, so I think the time has come to discuss the next steps and what we're hoping people might be interested in, which is the holistic management fundamentals training, which we're happy to be partnering with 3LM to offer here in Dunhill in County Waterford, and that is the 10th, 11th, and 12th of February 2026. So Sheila, do you want to go ahead and discuss that, please?
Sure. So this is course 1. It's the fundamentals of holistic management. And in it, you get exposure to the entire framework. You learn eco-literacy that we've been talking about, and you learn decision-making, holistic decision-making, 2 really essential components to be able to manage holistically. And it will be in Waterford at the beautiful facilities of the Bioregioning Group. And we have been sponsored by NOTS, which is National Organic Training Skill Net, since 2017. In Ireland, they sponsor all of our training. So it's a really good price at €205 for a 3-day training program. And it's course 1. There are 3 more courses after that, and we hope to be able to hold those programs there as well later in the year.
Super. Thanks, Sheila. And I think registration for this will be open soon. And of course, everyone who's here today will get an email in order to register for that. One question has just come in. If that's okay, we can cut in and ask that. Meg, do you want to go ahead and read it out, or do you want to read it? Whatever is easier for you.
Yeah, sure. And I'm just curious, this might be a much more complex answer than 5 minutes offers, but I'm just reflecting on how you guys are operating across a lot of different types of landscapes. And so I'm just curious if you have come up against challenges to adapt these practices across different types of landscapes and continents, and if you have strategies in place to sort of manage those, implementing the different sorts of challenges that might arise. Does that make sense?
That's a great question. Thank you, Meg. The reason that holistic management works anywhere on planet Earth is because built into it is ecological literacy and key insights about nature. And so, for example, one of the concepts is the concept of brittleness. And we understand there's a brittleness scale from 1 to 10. And without explaining too much, what that brittleness scale enables us to understand is what is the likely outcome of using the tools that we have to work with on the ecosystem itself. And so that enables us to adapt our management to anywhere on planet Earth by understanding the nuance of the brittleness scale.
Could I just build on that, Sheila, please?
Yes, please do.
Meg, it's a great question. And the only one thing we have to often work hard with is language. If we're working in places where, I speak English, they speak the local language, okay, that we're not familiar with. Sheila and I have explored this work internationally, and holistic management is successfully applied from villages in Zimbabwe, South Africa, and so on, very often in situations where people can't read and write, right the way through to working at cabinet level in various in governmental situations. So, as I say, the only thing that I often have to think about is language, and apart from that, it's a breeze. I'm complete.
Back to you, Keely.
Great, thanks very much. So I see Sam actually has put a link in the chat with a link to the course, so it's there, and I'm sure it will be made available in plenty of other places as well if they're interested in signing up. That is a really great price for the training, so that's nice of Knots to sponsor it, and we're really happy to partner on this as well. So I think if there aren't any more questions, I don't know, Sarah, would you like to come in with a kind of a closing remark?
There's a question saying any training in England. I don't know is the answer to that. I think the answer to that might be to keep an eye on the 3LM website. They have a list of all the trainings that are coming up under events. So if you go to 3LM, you'll find all their events in England, because they're based in England at the moment, and then Sam's the representative in Ireland. So, any other statements? No, I just think it was delightful to hear that variety of sort of different ways of all trying to deal with complexity and trying to find frameworks to deal with complexity, because it's so complicated, and then we sometimes want to just throw up our hands and say it's too difficult. But these kind of frameworks are beginning to appear that give us a framework to deal with complexity and still be able to have the narratives that we need to be able to make change. So I just think it's really motivating and inspiring for me, to give me slight hope that we're on the right sort of track to make this kind of change. So thank you very much. One last question there. Look, they're all coming in now. I thought it was very quiet for you lot. I know there's some very inquisitive and curious people out there. How many hours across all the courses? I think it was 9:30 to 5 for 3 days, wasn't it? Correct me if I'm wrong.
9:30 to 5 for 3 days. Yep.
Some of that's classroom based and some of it's out in the field.
Yeah, every day we do exercises in the field, but most of it is in the classroom. And we try to make it as real as possible and relate it to your real situation. You do not need to be a farmer to benefit from it. And lots of, I would say probably 30% of the people who've come through the training in total have not been farmers, and have really benefited from the training.
Great.
Okay, well, with that, we will say thank you very much to Sheila, Sam, and Christopher, and Sarah, and Meg, of course, is on our team as well. And we are at bioregion.ie. You can find all our contact information there if you need us. And Christopher's put one last comment, of course. There's a professional pathway there as well. So thanks all of it so much for attending, and we hope to hear from you all soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.